This episode is sponsored by Archaeological Tours. Want to dig deeper into Mexico's indigenous past and present? Allow Archaeological Tours to customize your Yucatan adventure. Archaeological works hand in hand with local indigenous guides to provide a tour that is entertaining, educational, and beneficial to the local community. For an adventure like no other, check out archaeogato.com. That's ARKEOGATO.com. Or just follow the link in the show notes. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and 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 why that's so.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to Tales from Atlantis, where we explore the fascinating worlds of Chicano, Mexicano, and Mesoamerican history and archaeology, while also challenging the myths and misinformation that surround them. I am your host, Curly Tlapoyawa, and sadly, Dr. Ruben Ariano Tlacatecat could not make it for this episode. He is knee-deep in finals week at the university, so he has some other concerns to deal with. But fear not, dear listeners, because I am joined by a very special guest and friend of mine, Dr. Magnus Pharao Hansen. Dr. Magnus Pharao Hansen is an anthropologist and linguist who works as an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen and author of the book Nahuatl Nation, Language Revitalization and Semiotic Sovereignty in Indigenous Mexico. So, and he's also a good friend of mine, and full disclosure, we have co-published in the past. So
true.
That's how I know him. Welcome to the show, man. It's good to have you back. It's been a long time.
Thanks. I'm happy to be back. I'm very happy to be on the show again.
And you are currently broadcasting from the motherland of Mexico in Nayarit, if
True.
I'm not mistaken. So what takes you there? What are you getting up to in Nayarit?
Well, I'm working on a large project where we aim to make dictionaries of two languages, Wirrárica and Nayari, or as they're previously called, Huichol and Cora. And we're working with communities here in Nayarit to build some dictionaries of those languages.
That's amazing. So how big is the team that you're there with?
We have we're working with an NGO that's based in Tepic called Sensontle, and they're basically the team that is working with me. And there's 5 or 6 integrants in this NGO, most of whom are speakers of the language.
That's excellent. And how long have you been working on that?
It's been a year and a half now. A year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've been putting in some work. And if you could just briefly talk about what is your research area in general, in case we have any audience members that are not familiar with your work.
Most of my career, I've been working with Nahuatl, and I've been documenting dialectal variation in Nahuatl and trying to make sense of how the different varieties of Nahuatl changed and how they got to the places where they are. And I've been working on also Nahuatl language politics, the way that Nahuatl has been used by the Mexican state in different periods of Mexican history. And I've been working on the way that Nahuatl languages express things related to spatial relations. And then recently I've been more and more trying to get further back in the history of Nahuatl languages, which requires one to do comparative historical linguistics, comparing Nahuatl languages and the Proto-Nahuatl language with its closest relatives in the Yucatecan language family. And in my work, I came to the conclusion that there's several theories of which Yucatecan languages might be closest to Nahuatl. And I came to the conclusion that the theory that has it that the Corachol languages, which is Wirrárica and Nayari, are the closest relatives of the Nahuatl languages. So that is also why I am putting particular focus on documenting those languages to make comparing with Proto-Nahuatl more easier and more efficient and better. So particularly Wirrárica is not a very well documented language in terms of lexicon or grammar. Recently, it's only sort of in the early phases of getting good documentation compared to Nahuatl. And Nayari has some documentation, though. Also, it's not huge. The amount of documentation that's there, but at least there's a good dictionary for one.
So,
for one variety.
Coming to this from a place where you are a linguist, a Nahuatl linguist, do you find that you can understand those languages? Are you developing like a better fluency of those languages at all?
Not yet.
Or is it all just like on the written word?
They're super different from Nahuatl. They're really very different. There are many words that you can see. The roots are the same, but the grammar of both those languages is quite different from Nahuatl languages. So even if I can understand some words and in a conversation I can pick up words, I still don't have the grammatical understanding to be able to put together an understanding of spoken Wirrárica. I'm focusing mostly myself on learning Wirrárica, and I'm still very much in the beginning phase of it. I do hope to be able to maybe become conversational, but I'm not sure, because it's a really very different and very hard language to get into.
Yeah, well, when you see it written out, with Nahuatl, I can understand, when I see it, I have a pretty good idea of how to pronounce the word. But with Wirrárica, it a lot of times I'm like, I have no idea how that word is pronounced.
Actually, that's the least of it. It has like now a relatively simple sound system. It does have some sounds that are weird or different from a Nahuatl perspective, but just the grammar is very, very different. Like it's the way that words fit together, the way that sentences are built. It's a completely different system, and also very, very interesting, and especially to understand how they could have developed from a language that was originally the same language at some point in the past, right? That's what I really find interesting to see. What are the processes of language change that creates such different languages from something that was originally the same? And nobody has any doubts that those three languages come from the same source language, but the question is how, right? And how they developed to be what they are, and what sequences of changes would have happened, and so on.
Yeah,
and that's what we're trying to unravel a little bit.
Super fascinating. So Cora and Wirrárica, are they considered Uto-Aztecan languages?
Yeah, they're both Uto-Aztecan languages. So they're members of everyone would agree, I think, that they're members of the southern branch of the Uto-Aztecan family. And some classifications have classified the Corachol languages with the languages spoken more in Sonora and Chihuahua. So like with Yaqui, Mayo, Raramuri, and Guarijillo, and those languages. And other classifications have classified them as more similar to Nahuatl languages. And I am on that latter team. I think that they're much closer related to Nahuatl, that they must have split from the other languages spoken in Sonora and Chihuahua at some relatively early point in time and moved south as a single language that then split into a Corachol and a Nahuatl branch at some point. That I think is relatively early.
That's awesome. So what I'm hoping to get across to the listener is just because a language is Euro-Aztecan, part of that family, doesn't mean that they are mutually like intelligible. Like you could understand from one language to another, right? Because you hear that a lot in pseudo-linguistics where, you know, people will say, well, Hopi is Euro-Aztecan, so therefore a Nahuatl speaker can talk to a Hopi speaker, no problem. And this is the kind of stuff that just gets repeated and shared all over the internet without any pushback. So
we'll be back after a quick break.
This episode of Tales from Astlantis is brought to you by Astlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromastlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
Yeah, that's a little bit, let's, as saying that, like, well, English and Greek are both Indo-European languages, so English speakers would be able to understand Greek. Mm-hmm. And of course, everyone knows that that's not the case. Like, we have a saying, it's all Greek to me for a reason. So in Yucatecan, from a Nahua point of view, you would say, oh, that's all Hopi to me.
So I'm excited because of your new research, and it's not really new research, right? Your current research, because I remember you had shown me some of it back when we went on that road trip to the Grand Canyon and Monument Valley when we were heading to San Diego, which was amazing, by the way. That was such a fun road trip. But you had shown me some of this research, and then the New York Times picked up on it. So you've published at this point. Yeah. And the headline of the New York Times was "New Crack at an Ancient Puzzle Reignites Debate for Archaeologists." And if you can, you know, tell us what this research is about. Like, why did the New York Times glom onto this to write something about it?
Yeah, it's so, as you say, it's an article that's been a long time in the making. I wrote it about 3 years ago with my good colleague Christoph Helmke, who is an epigrapher who has been working first a lot with Mayan writing and Mayan epigraphy, and also for the last more than 15 years he's been working on Teotihuacan writing. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we were in a project together where we were trying to figure out a little bit more about what possibly could be the language that Teotihuacan writing was written in. Because Christoph and another colleague of ours, Jesper Nielsen, who's also at the University of Copenhagen, they have been working on the Teotihuacan writing system for a while, and coming to the conclusion that this has to be a real writing system in the way that the writing systems of Western Mesoamerica work, that works similar to like the Aztec writing system, the Zapotec writing system, and several of the other undeciphered writing systems of Western Mesoamerica, which seem to work a little bit or quite a bit different from the way that Mayan writing is working, but still essentially to be a writing system that writes words in their, like giving a full description of the sounds of words. So that would be what we would call technically a glottographic writing system, so that it writes the language sounds, right? It has it writes the phonetics of sounds in the same way that English does, in the same way that Japanese does, right?
So rather than like a rebus or a...
No, rebus is exactly a way of writing words, the sounds of words, right? So the opposite of a glottographic writing system would be one that doesn't represent sounds of language directly, but could, for example, represent ideas, like the meaning without being connected to a language, a specific language. So if you have a writing system that is based only on logograms, then theoretically you could have a writing system that doesn't work for any specific language, but that could be read in any language, right? Because if you see a picture of a dog, you can read that in English as a dog, or you can read it in Nahuatl as chichi, or you can read it in Wirarika as zukui, or in French as chant. And it doesn't matter because you can see what it is and everyone can read it, right? So the writing could be separate from the language. It could represent meaning more or less directly.
Okay.
And that's
so I had a rebus and a logogram mixed up. Important,
so rebus is
important note, kids.
Exactly when you use a logogram, not for its meaning, but for its sound.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to write, if you have like what for example, you could have if you have a word, like what is it, like a good example of English rebus? I'm always struggling. I should have one ready whenever people ask. Yes, no, that's
just have a little business card printed out in a rebus.
Yeah, right.
You could just pull it out and be like
and
this.
Then when I when I figure something out, it's inappropriate, right? But, like I was just hearing the cock crow, and that would be an excellent example of a rebus, but it wouldn't look good, right?
Want.
Yeah, let's think of something else. Like let's say you want to write that's a good word for Mesoamerican language. You want to write cattail reed as a specific kind of reed, right? You would draw a cat and a tail and a reed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would know that actually spells not those three words. You're not talking about a cat and a tail and reed. You're talking about cattail reeds. So you spell a full word with three different logograms that are read for their sound. So, for example, a cattail reed, that would be tied specifically to English, because in Nahuatl that's called something else. It's called toli, or in Nahuatl, in Nahuatl, or in Danish it would be called donhama, which is, so you couldn't write those with those three logograms. That only works in English, where that kind of reed is called a cattail reed.
Cattail reed.
Yeah.
And speaking to the strength of like logograms, where they could have meaning across languages, this kind of relates to the international style, right, of Mesoamerican writing.
Yeah.
That, and I'm curious because the symbols, the glyphs, are what are you referring to these as in Teotihuacan?
Well, most of them the vast majority are logograms. So they are signs that represent a single word, like a root word. And then what we are suggesting in this paper is that if you read them using the sound values of the Proto-Corachol Nahua language, which is the language that evolved, according to me, into Nahuan languages and into the Corachol languages. If you use those sound values, you can actually see some of those logograms being used for their sound value instead of their meaning value. Right? And that, I think, and we think, Christoph Helmke and I, that is a rather strong argument to think that is a good candidate language for the language used in Teotihuacan for writing. So, of course, the big question, and that's what the New York Times article headline goes on, is this big ancient question is, what language would they have spoken in Teotihuacan? And it's a question that really has been hard to get at for various reasons. One of them has been because there's been a very big reluctance to even accept that they did use writing in Teotihuacan. Some archaeologists have argued that Teotihuacan is this exceptional city where they had a very big, complex civic organization system without having any type of writing system to transfer data and information, which is not very common in the world.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's not a common, like, you don't have these massive metropoles.
No, so this is
these very sophisticated systems of government.
Yeah. So that would be an exceptional thing. And the other thing is that it would also be an exceptional thing if their writing system was only based on logograms and could be read in any language without having a sort of a particular tie to a specific language. So, for example, it is possible to have a writing system that people will, of speaking different languages, will adopt that writing system and read it in their own way. So, for example, we know that happens with Chinese, that early Chinese was written, of course, in early Chinese, but very quickly it was adopted in Korea, in Japan, in Vietnam, and they would use Chinese logograms, but read them in their own languages. And that's how we get like kanji writing in Japanese, which comes from like their Chinese logograms, but they're read in Japanese most of the time. Sometimes they're actually still read in Chinese, I guess. But that's possible. But it would be an exception if you had a writing system that was never tied to a specific language in its beginning, before eventually maybe being extended to other languages. All writing systems that we know of have started in one language and has adapted to the sound system of that language before then being extended to other languages. So on the face of it, it would be very weird if Teotihuacan didn't have a writing system, and if that writing system wasn't tied to a specific language. But that has been an argument from some archaeologists. Other archaeologists and epigraphists have said, no, we can see that this looks like a writing system, and very probably it would have been tied to some language, and then the question becomes, which language? And there's also a number of different theories. So it's important to start by saying that Teotihuacan was a huge city. And you don't get huge cities where only a single language is spoken. And that's also the case for Teotihuacan. We know that there were entire neighborhoods, barrios, where they were speaking Maya. We found areas with Maya writing. We found areas with only Zapotec, pottery and Zapotec writing. And very probably there were also other barrios where they would speak other languages. But the thing is that those are identifiable because you can see that the things in those barrios come from those areas, and you can see that they use the writing systems of the areas of origin. But then there's like the main part of the city, and that doesn't look like anything anywhere else. Like when you see those types of writing, when you see those types of artifacts somewhere else in Mesoamerica, you assume this is from Teotihuacan. People from Teotihuacan must have come here. So this is characteristic of Teotihuacan itself. And what language would the people who were like the majority culture in Teotihuacan then have spoken? That is the question that vexes
it's the big question.
Archaeologists, right? Yeah.
So that people have a good understanding of the time frame that we're talking about here. Like when Teotihuacan existed, like about what time did it, I don't want to say collapse, but like what time did it stop functioning as this major?
There's such a thing, I think, as archaeologists speak of a collapse in Teotihuacan, where we see like the main area being burnt and abandoned, and that would happen sometime around between 550 and 600. In that period, we see a huge decline in the population of Teotihuacan, and we see some of the main centers being actively destroyed.
And that's CE or BCE?
That's CE. So
CE.
yeah, that's you could say it's almost sort of around the same time as the Roman Empire is in its terminal decline in Europe, and also the time when Teotihuacan sort of starts growing is around the century before our timekeeping system, and about 200 CE, we have a very large city with very large monumental architecture. So there's about 350 years or so where this city dominates not just Western Mesoamerica, west of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, but also apparently has a very strong presence in the Maya area, where we have depictions of people who look like they might have come from Teotihuacan, bringing weird weaponry, weird ceramic styles, and also weird words into the Maya area. And that's all mostly in the period between 200 and 500 and something, right? Where Teotihuacan has its heyday as a very, very significant power in this part.
Is that around the same time frame as when the spear thrower owl was seen as like the head?
So that is the main piece of evidence for Teotihuacan presence in the Maya area is on the stela. I always mix up if it's 21 or 31. I think it's 31, isn't it? In Tikal, that mentions the arrival of Siahkak.
Yeah.
And who is a representative in some way of someone else, whose name is written as an owl with a spear thrower. And the spear thrower is a weapon that is completely emblematic of Western Mesoamerica, particularly Teotihuacan, right? So they were the spear thrower people, and the Maya were probably more like blowgun people, right?
And that name is so cool. Siahkak. Is it born in fire?
Born in fire. That's a radical name.
Yeah, that's a great name. And spear thrower owl. Like, goddamn, we need to start naming our kids cooler names, people, because Bob and Bill just ain't cutting it anymore. What I love about that stele that you're talking about, and I don't remember which one it is that it says very specifically, on this date, Siahkak arrived, and then it lists their leaders like he entered the water, which was like the euphemism for
dying. Yeah,
our leader died.
So a bunch of guys like they just randomly entered the water on the day that he.
Yeah, when this guy shows up, people are entering the water.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a quote here from the New York Times article that I want to read because I have a question.
Yeah.
It says, the scientists acknowledged, though, that they face the same daunting limitation that has frustrated researchers for decades. There are only about 300 known texts from Teotihuacan, a tiny figure compared with the thousands of documented Aztec or Maya texts that help scholars learn those writing systems. So 300 is not a lot, but I want to ask you what qualifies as a text, because...
And that's so 300 sounds like it's a lot. It potentially at least like it's sizable. But many of these texts consist of a single sign or a combination of signs, right? So anything in those 300 texts, you get anything where you have signs that we consider to be likely to stand for words, right? And that in itself is not always easy to see. And that's another part of the thing with Teotihuacan writing, and as it also has been with Aztec writing, that it because it's figurative, all of the logograms are written in ways that actually look like the things that the logogram means. So they're pictures, right? So now writing was long said, no, that's pictographic writing. That's not really language. So it looks like images, and it's not always clear when you see something is writing. And most of these texts are like there's the Christoph, who is the authority of the two of us on the way that Teotihuacan writing is used. He usually says that the majority of those texts are on ceramics. So you find a piece of ceramic, and then there's maybe one glyph somewhere that may be a combination of 2 or 3 glyphs, but writing something, right? And since there's no broader context, it's not like now Maya writing where you have like rows of glyphs like neatly ordered and you can see this is definitely text, right? So here you have, every time you see Teotihuacan writing, you also have to start by making the argument, this is actually writing, this is not just a picture. Or these elements in this picture are writing, because that's the other thing, that it's all often combined with iconography that's representative, and then glyphs that are writing, right? So in the same way that you could say that if you watch comic, like you see Superman and you'll see an S on his chest and you'll say, okay, that's actually writing, but it's embedded in a picture in some way, right? And you can still sort of tease out there's some writing element here and there's some iconographic elements in there, but you have to make the argument every time. And it's only once you see that there's certain shapes that are just repeated in many different contexts and which are recognizable as shapes, like as glyphs, that you see, okay, this actually has to be a writing symbol, because otherwise it doesn't make sense that this glyph appears in so many different contexts. It's not just decoration. It's not just a pattern that they liked or whatever, right? And this is combined with other similar patterns or similar glyphs in different contexts. So that's a very important thing to say. 300 texts. That's given argumentation that these are texts, and it's not a lot. It's not a lot at all.
How many of these ceramics are fragments, and how many of them come from whole pots?
Oh, I don't know, but I know that some of the most important collections of Teotihuacan ceramic with lots of fragments has disappeared. Like the biggest,
Really?
The biggest collection, which came from a scholar called Hasse von Winig. When he died, it was sold in pieces. The entire collection of ceramics was sold, and nobody knows where those things ended up. And those were probably mostly a lot of that was fragments. So we only know of those in his work, like the drawings that he left, because he was one of the first ones to write on Teotihuacan writing, and to actually include a lot of drawings and to argue that this was writing.
And so, apart from the ceramics, you have the murals, right?
There's the murals. They're
murals.
much more well known, right? And they're stunning, and they're beautiful, and they're also mostly destroyed. So many of the murals, because of they're painted on plaster on walls, and the upper parts of the walls are often damaged so that the plaster falls down. So you only have like a band near the ground, which is usually a frieze of some sort. So we can't always, many of the places we can see, there was a huge mural here, but we can't see it anymore. Many of them were drawn when they were in better shape, but now they're not looking so good anymore. So some of the murals are also quite hard to read. But the one thing that I keep coming back to, like, there's so much of Teotihuacan that has not been excavated yet. Like, there's
Yeah. It's
at least
5% of the whole site's
it's
been
like
excavated.
5% of the site that's really excavated. And even many of the places that are excavated, we have very good reasons to think that there are murals underneath the part that has been excavated. So, for example, when you walk up the Alley of the Dead, as it's called in Teotihuacan, there's one place where they've removed like the stones that have been the surface, and behind those stones there's a mural of a jaguar, right? And when you see that, and then you see all those buildings up that very, very long avenue having those stones in front, and you can think, holy shit, there's probably murals behind all of this. And of course, you can't just like take all that down to see the murals. They're like, but there's more there. Like, so that's what we're hoping for, of course, that more evidence will come up that will confirm or reject this proposal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because that's part of the process, right?
It is.
You have to actively try to
So
disprove your own hypothesis.
What you want, of course, is a hypothesis that can actually be falsified.
Mhm.
Because if it can't, then you're not really doing any work that
Then
can
you're just
help
talking
people.
shit.
Yeah, basically.
Then you're just religion.
Yeah. And we have that too, right? But we're trying to do it the other way. So hopefully what we say is something where people can say, no, this new piece of evidence definitely shows that these guys were wrong. And then
Yeah.
so we're hoping that other evidence comes as well, or more of that says, okay, this actually looks like they were right. But that's for the future to show.
Yeah, and it's exciting. And just so we're clear, we have ceramics, we have murals, but there are no like deerskin or paper documents that exist.
No. So the time period for that is a little bit too deep for those things to have been likely to survive. Like, I guess it's not impossible that something could turn up, but it hasn't so far. There are images in Teotihuacan iconography of people with books, so we know they must have had writing in other formats that would have been perishable, but we haven't found any of that yet because it perished.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was representation of books.
Yeah.
That's badass.
Yeah.
And so I guess the $1 million question would be, what language do you think is have you put a name to it?
Well, the way that we refer to it in abbreviation is PCN, which stands for Proto-Corachol Nahuatl, which is the language that would develop into Corachol, Proto-Corachol, the language that then would develop into Cora and Huichol, or Nairi and Wixárika, and then Nahuatl, which would pre-Nahuatl, which would be sort of the earliest branch that would develop into Proto-Nahuatl, which would develop into all of the Nahuatl languages that exist today and that have existed. And I think that most likely what would have been spoken and written at Teotihuacan would have been the Eastern dialect of this Proto-Corachol Nahuatl language, which is what became Nahuatl. And that's simply because it fits, given the geographics of the Nahuatl languages, that the area where Teotihuacan is also where that has been an important center for the spread of Nahuatl. And there's not really any good reason to think that speakers of Corachol languages would have been there that early. So probably we're talking about a dialect continuum that spread from western Mexico, sort of Nayarit, Jalisco, and all the way down the Bajío to Hidalgo and the basin of Mexico, and where they would have been able to understand each other, but the westernmost ones would have sounded more like Nayaris, and the eastern ones would have sounded more like Nahuas, and they would gradually then have diverged and become these two language groups.
That's amazing. How long does it take, realistically, for something like that to happen?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of the Four Disagreements? Just visit talesfromastlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromastlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show.
It can happen relatively quick, but in this case, it would appear that they would have had something like at least more than half a century to drift apart, right? If we think about it, if what happened in Europe at the same time that we know about, like if we start at around 200, which is when we also see that Teotihuacan was already a large city, that's when we would have only Latin at that point, right? And in the entire Roman Empire. And then around 800 to 1,000, or that's about 800 years after that, is when we start seeing signs of what is early French, early Spanish, and so on, right? So the divergence from Latin to the Romans languages would have been about 600 to 800 years. You could, of course, say it might have started a little later because it only started at the fall of the Roman Empire, obviously, but that's the time period that you would expect a language to develop into some relatively different new languages. And this looks like it could be basically the same time frame where we see a change from the Proto-Corachol-Nahuatl language, which would have been spoken then between 200 to 500 or 600, and then at the end of Teotihuacan, those speakers who would have been there, who would have been like the easternmost Corachol-Nahuans, they spread out from Teotihuacan as the site declined, and they would become the speakers then of the early Nahuan languages, which would first be like an Eastern and a Western Nahuan language.
Wow. So what kind of pushback are you getting on this? Because there's some like really, really extraordinary claims.
It is. I'm trying to.
You're illuminated.
There's the sun has moved a little bit there. Well, so maybe we should start by mentioning that so we're not the first people to claim that probably an ancestor of Nahuatl would have been spoken in Teotihuacan. Several other scholars have made that suggestion, including Carl Taube, who's an iconographer, who's worked a lot on Teotihuacan, including Sergio Gomez Chavez, who's one of the main archaeologists working at Teotihuacan, together with a linguist called Timothy King. And recently, Gordon Whittaker, who is one of the experts on Aztec writing, have all suggested that probably Teotihuacan writing could be tied to the Aztec writing system, both because there's some similarities in the visual part, but also because that's an area where Nahuatl has been spoken for a long time. The question, of course, is how long time it has been spoken there. And their linguists have been, the past 40 years or so, have been thinking that Nahuatl came very late to that area, and that probably before Nahuatl came to the Valley of Mexico, other languages like Otomi, Totonac would have been spoken in that region. And so they have been favoring those languages, Otomi, Totonac, maybe even Huastec, maybe even a Mihisocian language, which is a proposal by the late Terence Kaufman, could have been spoken in that area. So they've been seeing those as more likely candidates for the language of Teotihuacan. But in that sense, it's not an outrageous proposal that we're making. We're just siding with the tradition that sees Nahuatl as a likely language of that area. And our main argument, apart from the actual readings, for why this makes sense in terms of history, is that I don't agree that Nahuatl would have arrived very late in the center of Mexico. In fact, my own research on the history of Nahuatl and the spread of Nahuatl suggests that precisely the central Mexico, the Valley of Mexico, would be a better candidate for the place where Nahuatl develops and starts spreading out, which would suggest that it could have been present longer than we think. The reasons that people have been reluctant to believe this is partly because of the Nahuas themselves that have ethnohistorical accounts that tell that they came from the north and that they arrived relatively late. And these accounts, of course, are from the Mexica people, specifically, who also called themselves, before they called themselves Mexica, they called themselves Azteca, and they describe this migration of the Azteca groups, which are the ones that mostly the ones that spoke Nahuatl, that they classified as Aztecas, from somewhere north of Mexico City. And of course, they don't give any very geographically clear maps of where they came from, or they don't say how long a distance they traveled. And they don't say in what period they traveled or over how many years they would have traveled, right? So there's a lot of reasons to think that, yes, of course they would have come from the north. By now we know that the Euro-Aztecan language family came from the north, but we don't know necessarily that this is what the Aztec migration stories refer to. Like, this could be much later migrations, because we know that
absolutely.
those tribes of Nahuatl speakers would have moved around quite a lot. And if the Mexicas, who are the last, according to their own account at least, the last ones to arrive in the area of Mexico, well, they could have moved simply from somewhere in Hidalgo state, close to Tula, who knows, or maybe a little bit further up in the Bajío. But all the other Nahuas could have been there still, right? So the ethnohistoric accounts, I don't think that we should see them as necessarily contradicting an early Nahua presence or Nahua ancestral presence in the basin of Mexico, because those accounts pertain specifically to the Mexica, not necessarily to the entire group of Nahuatl speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it doesn't say when this happened. So
well, it just says Set Tecpat, right? I think is it the Botorini? One of the codices has Set Tecpat as the year of the migration, but that could mean,
well, that happens every 52 years, right?
Every 52 years there was a Set Tecpat. So we don't really know which specific Set Tecpat that they're talking about.
No, so that's part of the pushback is no. Some scholars have made up their minds that Nahuas are latecomers to Central Mesoamerica, and they couldn't have been there. And some scholars are saying, okay, but we just can't we can't know. There's not enough texts. It's like you need many more examples of the same words being written in the same way to be able to make that argument, and that is partly right. That would be much better. The ready systems that have been truly deciphered have had many more examples, right? And that is ideally what we would have. But on the other hand, we have to start with what we have. We can't wait So we don't
until everything's
need to
perfect.
wait. Everything's perfect, right? Especially not since we're making like proposals that can be tested. And then there's some more technical, and I think those are actually the better pushback is where they there's some technical things where you're making an argument, but this looks like it could be a counter argument. So, for example, one very good argument is that we're actually proposing that some of the words that are found in the Maya written record, specifically the stelas at Tikal, that they can be read in this early Corachol Nahuatl language. But some experts, particularly Albert Tavlechin, is saying, okay, but it's weird that they're writing all the consonants in those words with the Mayan letters that write glottalized consonants. So they don't write, for example, we have a word that we're reading as Kosaka, which is an early proposal by David Stewart that could be an hour word, mean necklace, Koskat. And it actually works. We can show that the earliest form of this word in the pre-Nawa language would have been Kosaka. And that is precisely what is written in that text, except that apparently it uses the glottalized K. Or maybe that particular one doesn't. But some of the other one use the glottalized case where we're saying, okay, but for this to make sense, because there are no glottalized consonants in Uto-Aztecan. So we have to read it as the non-glottalized version. And that is potentially a problem, because then you have to explain why would they write it with the glottalized letter instead of the plain K letter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Albert is saying, okay, so this suggests that this could be another language that has glottalized consonants, and Otomi is a language that has a distinction between glottalized and non-glottalized consonants. So he's saying that actually looks more like it could be Otomi. The problem is that you cannot read that. Kosaka doesn't mean anything in Otomi, with or without a glottalized
Interesting.
consonant. So
and how big of a difference does that glottal make in the pronunciation?
What we're saying is that actually you could posit other explanations for why the Mayas would use glottalized consonants when writing, right? And that might be simply because it sounds strange. It doesn't sound like their usual K. So they use the slightly different K. And that could be, for example, because some of the Nawa consonants could be, because in Nawa you can't have two, at least not in early Nawa. You get that later on. You can't have two consonants next to each other. There's also always a vowel between. And when a consonant is between vowels, you often get it softened. So this early language seems to have had a difference between strong consonants and weak consonants. And the strong consonants would appear in the beginning of words and at the end, in certain other environments, and in the beginning of syllables that were stressed. And the weak ones would be in the beginning of syllables that were unstressed. And maybe this would be the Maya way to show this phonetic distinction between strong and weak consonants. That's at least one way that you could explain why they would choose to represent it that way. And in other ways, like sometimes, like if you hear people speak weirdly, you just sort of also choose like the weird letters, right? So sort of the way that if you want to write Nahuatl in a way that looks cooler, you would write it with a Z instead of an S, because that makes it look nicer, right? Some of my friends do that, at least.
Guilty as charged. And the only reason I do that is because I think the Z just looks like a stronger letter.
Yeah,
like,
and maybe that's exactly what the Mayas were doing. Like, we want to, like, this this sounds strong or it sounds hard when they're speaking, so we're going to use the strong or hard version of the consonant. We don't know that much, I guess, about like how classical Maya people thought about the aesthetic quality of their own sound systems. But
well, it was a beautiful language,
definitely.
the way it's written. It's gorgeous. So I mean,
and
it stands to reason
beautiful too. Yeah.
It stands to reason that they would put in some extra effort in the stylistic
to
representation.
sort of represent the foreignness of this writing, of this language that came from somewhere else and sounded probably horrible to them.
Yeah. So I saw some pushback online where someone said, actually, you know what? I'm going to get to this later because it all stems from this one video. There's a video floating around right now online, and I'm sure some of our listeners have seen this video because it's being shared to me. I'm not even joking, like 10 times a day. Somebody sends me this video and they're like, what do you think of this? And I'm sure you've seen the video, you know which one I'm talking about. It's this guy who he's very confidently misrepresenting the substance of your research. And he's saying, Magnus Pharao Hansen and his co-researcher, who's your co-author on this?
Christoph Helmke.
Yeah, I can't pronounce that. Helmke,
yeah.
Helmke, okay. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, these two guys, they're proposing that the Aztecs or Mexicas are the direct descendants of the people from Teotihuacan, and that the people from Teotihuacan spoke Nahuatl, and that the Mexicas came from, this group, that they're the direct descendants of these people. And people are just sharing this all over the place. And so what I'm seeing is people are disagreeing with this video, but they're disagreeing with the misinterpreted version of the video, if that makes sense. They're not countering your argument. They're countering
his argument.
Argument that he's claiming that you made. And so they're saying like, oh, well, this is just modern day Nahua-centrism in academia to claim that the Mexica come from Teotihuacan. And I'm like, that's not what the research says, though. What do you think of that video, first of all? Like, I'm sure you've seen it.
Well, I think it's funny, of course, like, because I've really enjoyed, of course, to be able to publish stuff that gets people excited and that people want to read and that people like want to disseminate in all kinds of different formats, right? So there's TikToks and YouTube videos and all those things. And of course, also we were prepared that people would read that research in different ways, right? Because you read it from where you're coming from in some way, right? Yeah. And of course, we were expecting that like there'd be some people who would say this is now centrism or Mexica-centrism, because we're basically proposing in that sense that yes, now it has a bigger role in the history of Central Mexico than has been generally agreed upon. So we're sort of prepared out from it, but it's super fun to see like how psyched some people get and like how they get it to fit into whatever kinds of weird ideas they otherwise have. So like there's also Mormons saying, okay, 2 Danish researchers have proved the Book of Mormon true. I'm pretty sure that's not what I'm doing.
I've not seen that. And this is a video, or it's
yeah, no, I think it was on Facebook. Someone shared it on Facebook, like from some Mormon apologetics account.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So they're basically saying that you've proven that the Lamanites all spoke Nahuatl. Is that what?
That seems to be the implication.
But just so we're clear, you're not claiming that the Mexica are directly descendant from Teotihuacan.
Well, In a way, we are, right? Because we're saying that all.
So you're just going to
Nawa
cause more
speakers-
problems.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually making it worse right
People
now.
are going to read that.
But we were saying that all Nawa speakers descend from what would have been probably Teotihuacan, right? And not only them, also Wirarica speakers would also descend from
Mhm.
people who spoke that language and who were present at Teotihuacan. So what, for example, that means is that there's some of those words that we're proposing the readings of that you can't read in Nahuatl. You can't read them in Proto-Nahuatl either. You have to compare with, for example, Wirarica. Wirarica in many cases has the older form of the word, because Nahuatl sort of often skipped, it drops vowels, and then you get those two consonants standing together. And Wirarica does not. So it keeps the older form of the word. And what it looks like to us is that the Teotihuacan texts are using that, something that is closer to the Wirarica writing, right? But that doesn't really mean that that the speakers of whatever language was spoken at Teotihuacan would have been closer related to Wirarica people
Mhm.
either, right? Because they were related to the ancestors of all of those languages. And all speakers of Nahuan and all speakers of Wirarica and Nayari would potentially have ancestors who spoke this language. And I say potentially because, of course, language and genes don't follow each other.
Yeah.
Like, you can learn a language without having the learning or adopting the genes of whoever teaches the language to you, right? People do that all the time. Most people in the world are bilingual.
Don't say
So
that in this country.
Yeah, all right, except in the U.S. Yeah. So languages and genes, they don't follow each other. So many of the people who speak Nahuatl today, their ancestors would have spoken different languages, but at some point they shifted to Nahuatl. In the same way that many of the people who today speak Spanish, their ancestors spoke Nahuatl. So all this about direct descendants, that's a little bit that's iffy when you're talking about language, right? Because the language descends from a different path than genes, and we can't assume it to be the same path. But linguistically, what we're saying is that yes, Mexicas and Tlaxcaltecas and Nonoalcas and the people of El Salvador and the Nahuatl speakers of Honduras, of Durango, the Nahuatl speakers who came to New Mexico in the 16th century, they would all have their linguistic ancestors
Yeah.
would have been in Teotihuacan. And that doesn't mean we can't say anything about the genetics, right? In the sense of biological ancestry, that's a completely different question. Especially in the scenario that we're thinking about, where Teotihuacan is a multi-ethnic town that has probably a language that is a little bit more important than the others, in the sense that that's the language that they're putting into writing. It doesn't mean necessarily they're the most powerful group. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're the majority group, but it's their language that's being put into writing. Like, so in the same way, like, we have a lot of Latin texts written in Denmark in the 12th century. That does not mean that most Danes were Latin speakers in that period, right? So there are all kinds of ways where you need to separate the people from the language and the writing system, right? Because those don't necessarily line up with each other. And our argument is specifically about the language and the writing system. I think that there's one of the arguments in the article. One of the people who comment on it is Michael Smith, who's an archaeologist, and he's arguing, well, we also need to know more about the archaeology and the genetics of this scenario to know more about who the people of Teotihuacan are, and that's absolutely sure. That's a different way to look at the same scenario, and you could hope for different ways in which the archaeological or the genetic record might support the idea of connections with northwestern Mexico. But also there are ways in which that might not be the case, and the language might still be there, right? In the same way that you could find Latin in Britain or Scandinavia in the 10th century.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around that a place like Teotihuacan being a multi-ethnic city, this massive multi-ethnic city with different languages being spoken. There's like this disconnect because now you look at Teotihuacan and it's, the plaster is all gone. I mean, not all of it, but most of the plaster is gone. Because all of these structures would have been plastered and then painted and had reliefs on them and just been very different than what we're used to seeing right now. And just like this alive, vibrant, very colorful. And then you're hearing all these different languages spoken. And I think it's hard for some people to wrap their heads around that. When I take people to Chaco Canyon, for example, I have to remind them like these structures would have been plastered. They would have been covered. They didn't look like this. And, if you could imagine smoke rising and fires burning at night and like, we're so far removed from what these places actually looked like when they were living that I think that gets lost in it, where people have a hard time conceptualizing. Like they think, well, Magnus is saying that the Mexicas came from Teotihuacan. And so in their brains, that equates to one day people were living in Teotihuacan.
And then they left and they found it at the Tenochtitlan.
Yeah, like stuff like that. Like there's this weird disconnect in like how much time would have passed.
It's like just looking at grasping time and grasping like the complexity of any actual real life society is beyond most people. Like that's one of the things is the basis for nationalism, right? Like is that you just want to simplify everything to the point where you can make it make sense in some neat categories that you can. And reality is always much cooler and much richer, and there's so many patterns that you can explore at the same time. And then sometimes you find a signal in all that noise, right? And that's what I think we think we've done. Like we found a signal. And we've interpreted it, and we hope that future signals will corroborate it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that Teotihuacan was now a city. It doesn't mean that everybody there, like our ancestors of like Moctezuma or anything like that. Not at all. Like there's from the fall of Teotihuacan around 550 to 600 to the founding of Tenochtitlan, there's a longer span from that point to the founding of Tenochtitlan than there is from the founding of Tenochtitlan. No, that's the same span basically from the founding of Tenochtitlan to today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we're as far removed from the founding of Tenochtitlan as the founders of Tenochtitlan were from the fall of Teotihuacan. That's a huge time span. And they weren't just sitting around there waiting, right? Like they were moving around, making new cities, like spreading out. The languages were diversifying. They were mixing. They were borrowing words, and lending out words, right? So there's a very considerable period of time where people were doing other things after Teotihuacan fell. And before the Mexica even began to exist, really.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact when the Mexica starts to exist, right? Because you referred to not for a fact, but we know that they saw themselves as having come into being in a specific time and place when they were told by Huitzilopochtli that you're not Azteca anymore, you're Mexica now.
You are now Mexica.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one last question. So this language, the system, the writing system, how does this relate to, or does it relate to at all, to the international style of writing? Like, could it also be seen as like an ancestor of this sort of international style of writing where you had Mixtec, Zapotec, Nahuas, all these different groups using common symbols to represent similar ideas, but across a vast landscape, right? They're all speaking different languages, but they could interpret the symbols that were painted on these ceramics to mean the same things.
So I'm not the expert on the writing traditions of Mesoamerica. Of the two of us, that's Christoph who knows that stuff better. But for example, I'm pretty sure that he would agree, and that epigraphers would agree that, for example, the Zapotec writing system already existed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's had its own writing tradition at this time, right? And some of the other ones would have come subsequently. And some of those would probably be derived from the Teotihuacan tradition, and others from the Zapotec tradition, or mixed, and some from the Isthmus writing, Epialmec tradition, Maya tradition, and so on, right? So there are several earlier writing traditions in Mesoamerica that share some things, but that are also different, right? So probably many of the logograms that are like directly pictographic, but you can see what they represent, they would have been read in the same way, right? But many of the other signs are sort of not that clearly representing something. Like some of them are geometric or complex shapes, but they don't really look like anything particular. So you wouldn't really be able to have those signs work in that way as unless that there's a historical, a social reason that they would read them the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you see any calendrical symbols being used?
Yeah, we have some calendrical symbols in Teotihuacan writing, but not a lot and not enough. So we don't have the names or the glyphs for all of the day symbols, mostly for the year bearers.
Okay.
So, and which makes sense, right? Because those are the people would write years more than they would write single days, and in years you only get 4 different year signs. And some of them are very similar, and some of them are different enough that we can't say exactly how they were meant to be pronounced. So, for example, there's one glyph that epigraphers of Teotihuacan have called the reptile eye glyph, which looks like it would be the day sign Acatl. Like, so the first day sign, right? But it doesn't necessarily, like, you can't see from the sign that it looks like a reed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not straightforward to propose that it would have necessarily been read like reed. And you see it with associations to storm god and to certain places and so on. But we haven't been completely able to propose a reading of it yet, though we're working on it. Because there's some arguments that could make you think that maybe it would be also read as a reed, but there are 2 words for reed in Nahuatl and also in Corachol Nahuatl. So, and what are the other ones? I forget.
Well, what's the second word? Because I know akat.
Tol.
Tol.
Yeah, which is also a very interesting word.
And is that where you'd get tolan from?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, man, I love this stuff. I remember when we sat at my kitchen table and you pulled out your laptop and you're like, check this out.
Yeah.
And like we were just geeking out over it.
It's been like a really extremely exhilarating process where like you find things and it looks like, wow, this suddenly makes sense in a new way. Or that like there are these patterns, and then you're looking for something and then you find it. Like that's what happens in the way that I use it. Okay, so because I've been reconstructing these historically ancient forms of the words, right? And sometimes I'm looking for, is there a cognate for this word? And then suddenly you find it, and it just falls into place, and I can reconstruct that earlier form. And then sometimes later on, that reconstructed forms make sense of a glyph in Teotihuacan, right? That's very, very satisfying.
That feels so cool.
That experience,
Yeah.
where you can confirm your own hypothesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, of course, always a little bit easier than having other people confirm them for you.
Yeah. And then you second guess yourself, like, well, am I being a little too overzealous with this? Am I?
That's definitely a risk. Like, I'm very aware of that risk, and I'm also seeing how it just happens. Like, even to the best scholars, like you fall in love with an idea, and then everything you look at points towards it. And I'm really hoping that that's not what we've done here. And it's something that future scholars will look at and say, okay, there's actually something in there that brought that whole process forward.
Yeah. So is the paper itself, is that behind a paywall, or is that something that our listeners can access?
It is unfortunately behind a paywall. In the 2 years that the paper was in under review, the journal changed their policies from allowing you to pay for open access to no longer allowing that. So that meant basically the paper was accepted. We had everything, and we could, like, either we publish it, paywalled, or we don't publish it. So we had to accept that. But luckily we are allowed to share it with colleagues. And I would consider anyone who writes a request to my institutional email a potential colleague.
Sweet. So we'll include your institutional email in the show notes.
Also, if you have ResearchGate, you can request it, and I can send it through ResearchGate, which I
cool.
Yeah.
That's great. So what's the next step? What do you
Well, we have a couple of other papers. So what we have in this one, because of course it's a huge argument, because we have to make first the argument this is writing, which then we have to make the argument there's a language called Proto-Corotal Nawa, and then we have to make the argument that we couldn't actually maybe read some signs in this language. But we weren't able to include all our evidence, all our readings of Teotihuacan glyphs in that one paper. So actually, I think we have our best arguments and our best readings yet to be published. So
nice.
Stay tuned for that. Some of that
sounds great.
We have a reading of what spear thrower owl's actual name would have sounded like. Yeah.
Very cool. And what do you think the word Teotihuacan, like, how do you translate that? Because I've heard like a million different translations of that word.
Yeah, that's a complicated one. It doesn't really follow what you would expect Nahuatl grammar to do. So that's why it lends itself to different interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not too weird, because with names, especially important names like deity names and important place names, you often get like an earlier form or a non, like a form that's sort of fossilized at some point in its development. But I think I agree with what my colleagues Christoph and Jesper Helmke and Nielsen have proposed, that it probably doesn't mean place where the gods came into being, but place where the sun came into being, because the original meaning of Teot seems to have been sun more than necessarily a deity. So a specific.
Well, you see that's represented, right? The glyph for Teot is
it's a sun.
The sun.
Yeah.
So that would make absolute
and also
sense.
it fits well with the origin myth of the sun coming into existence at Teotihuacan, where the gods gather at Teotihuacan, and then one of them becomes the sun. So there's several reasons why that actually is a relatively good proposal. But I don't think, of course, that is what the people who lived there would have called their own town.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the other side of this.
Yeah.
So do you all have a hypothesis on what the name would have been? Is there any?
I think so. There's some hypothesis both by Gordon Whittaker, another one by Jesper and Christoph. And I'm not completely decided, but I think maybe a good possibility would be that it would be related to reeds, toll.
Really?
Particularly, there's at least one place glyph that has the reptile eye glyph in it, and if that would be read as a reed, then I'm thinking that the existence of Tolan would make sense, right? As a early place name, though it could also be a later reading of it, I guess.
Man, that's too cool.
That would
Can't
be very
wait
cool.
to read the new stuff.
That's definitely not something that we're sure about yet, because there are different glyphs that could be the name of Teotihuacan. What is it that Gordon Whittaker proposes? I forget right now.
I'll just ask him.
Yeah, he has an article called "The Names of Teotihuacan." That's where you can see his proposals.
Very cool, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fascinating. I love talking about this kind of stuff and just
me too.
Geeking out about it. So you are in Nayarit right now, then you're heading back to DF and then back home, back to your homeland.
And back home. Yeah.
How long is that flight?
It's a 12-hour flight to Europe, and then I'm shifting in Amsterdam.
Well, I hope you have a great flight.
I will.
And thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure as always.
A lot for inviting me. I'm always very happy to connect with your listeners, some of the clever podcast listeners out there.
See, dear listeners.
Yeah.
You get love.
And remember, the truth is like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it's always good for you.
Timoitase.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Astlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromastlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.